Okay, these notes, 2.7, more inequalities, is a little bit different than 2.6 because it's higher than x to the first. It's either x to the second or x to the third, or there's fractions. So, in the first one, it's already factored for you. So what I want you to do is change the greater than sign to an equal sign and pretend that it's just an equal sign, and you would have to solve for x. And all you would do is set both of the parentheses equal to 0 and solve for x. So one answer is x equals 7/4, and the other answer is x equals 2/3. Those would be the answers if it was an equal sign. And you have to use charts to solve all of these today. So 2/3 is about right here, and 7/4 is farther along. These would be answers if it was an equal sign, but it's not. It's an inequality sign. So what you're going to do is you're going to draw a line through 2/3 and 7/4, and notice that there's different zones that because I made a line at 2/3 and 7/4. What you need to do is try a different number in each of the zones back into the original problem. For example, 0 lands to the left of 2/3. So I'm going to try 0, and then 2/3 to 7/4, 1 lands in between 2/3 and 7/4. And I'm going to try 2, because 2 is after 7/4. And what you're going to do is, I'm going to plug 0 back up into the original problem. So 2 minus 3 times 0. 4 times 0 minus 7 is greater than 0. And then I'm going to plug 1 into the original. 2 minus 3 times 1. 4 times 1 minus 7 is greater than 0. And then plug in 2. 2 minus 3 times 2. 4 times 2 minus 7 is greater than 0. So all I did was, in place of all the x's, I used 0 in all the x's, I tried 1 in all the x's, and I tried 2 in all the x's. And as you can see, that's what I did here. And now I have to just see if it's a true statement or a false statement. This is going to make a 2, and this is going to make a -7. Is a -14 greater than 7? No, it's not. And then I do 2 take away 3 is a -1. 4 take away 7 is a -3. Is 3 greater than 0? Yes, it is. And then 2 take away 6 is a -4. 8 take away 7 is 1. Is a -4 greater than 0? No, it's not. And the only answer then would be the interval between 2/3 and 7/4, parentheses, because notice that there is no line underneath it. And this is yes, the interval between 2/3 and 7/4. Okay. The second problem is pretty much identical to the first one, except it's not factored. So I have to bring the x squared over, because you can't factor unless you have a 0 on the right hand side. I like my x squared to be positive, so I'm going to change them all to their opposites by multiplying by 0, or by -1, sorry. And if you multiply by -1, you need to switch the sign. The first problem was factored for you. The second problem isn't factored, so I'm going to factor it. And I'm going to pretend it's an equal, so now x equals 4 and x equals a -3. So I solved it, pretending that it was an equal sign. Again, if it was an equal sign, the 4 would have been an answer and the -3 would have been an answer. And again, you have zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. And you have to put it back up into the original problem. And a number less than a -3, I'm going to try a -4 back up on top. I'm going to try 0 back up on top. And I'm going to try the number 5. Again, those 3 circle numbers lie in that zones. Zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. So when I put a negative 4 back up into the original problem, it looks like this. Is 8 less than or equal to 16? Yes, it is. 0 plus 12 is less than 0. Is 12 less than or equal to 0? No, it's not. Is 5 plus 12 less than or equal to 25? Is 17 less than or equal to 25? Yes, it is. So, my two answers are a negative infinity to a negative 3 with a bracket, and the reason why it's a bracket is because there's a line with the inequality, and 4 to infinity. Okay, my next two problems, I'm going to deal with what happens if there's a fraction in the problem. So fractions, you have to do something special with the fraction. So again, I'm going to set this equal and put the 4 over 1, and I've got a fraction equals a fraction, so I'm going to cross multiply. And I'm going to get x minus 2 equals 12x plus 20. Subtract 12x, I get a negative 11x equals a negative 22. So x is equal to, sorry, it's supposed to be a positive 2 right here, not a negative 22, a positive 22. So x equals a negative 2. There's only one answer, and the only answer is at a negative 2. So you have an answer at a negative 2. It looks like there's only going to be two zones, but whenever you do fractions, you can never have 0 in the denominator in math. So what I have to do is take my 3x plus 5 and bring it over here. You don't want it to equal to 0. You don't want the denominator to equal to 0. So 3x cannot equal a negative 5. So x cannot equal 5/3. And a negative 5/3 would be over here. This is not an answer, it's a restriction. So do you see why I put an A or an R underneath the numbers? The first two problems always have an A because there is no restriction because it's not a fraction problem. It's only when you have a fraction problem do you have to state restriction. Again, we have a zone 1, a zone 2, and a zone 3. And you have to try a number back into the original. And I'm going to erase this all to know what the original looks like. And this is what the original looks like. A number less than a negative 2, I would probably try negative 3. A number greater than a negative 5/3, I would probably use 0. And the middle one's a little tougher. It's a negative 2 and a negative 5/3. What's in between a negative 2 and a negative 1 2/3? Well, this is a negative 1.6 repeating. Sorry to say, I would probably try a negative 1.8. That lies in between those. So I'm going to try a negative 1.8 into the original. Okay, so I'm just going to erase this part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a negative 3 minus 2. So all I did was replace the x with the negative 3, and I'm going to replace this x with a negative 3. See if it's less than or equal to 4. Negative 6 over a negative 9 plus 5 is a negative 4. Is a positive 6/4 less than or equal to 4? Yes, it is. Okay, now I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do the 0, 1 next. I'm going to wait and do the decimal later. I'm going to do the 0 minus 2 over 3 times 0 plus 5 is less than or equal to 4. Is a negative 2/5 less than or equal to 4? Yes. Okay, now I'm going to go over here and do the negative. Is a negative 1.8 minus 2 all over 3 times a negative 1.8 plus 5 less than or equal to 4? Or a negative 3.8 all over, I got to get my calculator out here. This makes a negative 5.4 plus 5. This is going to end up being a no. This one's going to end up being a no if you keep going. So the answer to the problem is this. There are two yeses, so one is a negative infinity to a negative 2 with a bracket, because a negative 2 is an answer, so you can use a bracket. Negative 5/3, it can't be a negative 5/3, and that's why there's a parenthesis. So that's why it's important to have the A's and the R's located. Okay, one more fraction one. It's nice to see it again. So again, make this equal to 0. Put it over 1. If you cross multiply, you get x squared minus 16 equals 0, because anything times 0 is 0. This is x minus 4, and this is x plus 4 equal to 0. X equals 4, x equals a negative 4. Those are your two answers. At 4 and at a negative 4 are your answers. Okay, we're going to erase the equal sign. Again, whenever you have a fraction, you have to take the denominator and come over here, and these are your restrictions. We don't just have one restriction like we did in the last problem. We're going to have two, because it's an x squared. X minus 5, x plus 1 cannot equal 0, so x can't equal 5, x can't equal a negative 1. So at 5, which is here, you have a restriction, and at negative 1, which is in between those two, you also have a restriction. That's why this is time consuming, because you have 1 zone to try, 2 zones to try, 3 zones to try, 4 zones to try, and 5 zones to try back into the original problem. And the original problem is right there. I think you get that you have to try a number in zone 1 and for this x, and for this x, and for this x, and see if it's a true or false statement. I just thought I'd just fill this in quicker so we can get done with these notes, because I think you have the right idea on how to plug the numbers back into the original to see if it's true or false. Well, I would plug a negative 5 in there, and it's going to end up being a yes. I would plug a negative 2 in there, and it's going to end up being a no. Between a negative 1 and 4, I would plug 0 back up in there, and it would be a yes. 4 and 5 isn't going to be easy. I would put in 4 and a half back up into there, and it's going to be a no. And I would probably plug 6 up there, and it's going to be a yes. So there are 3 zones that are true. And that little a helps you write it out. So you're going to do a negative infinity to a negative 4 with a bracket, because a negative 4 is an answer. A negative 1 is the next one, but has to be a parenthesis because there's a restriction to a positive 4. But a positive 4 is an answer, and that's why we use a bracket. Union with a parenthesis, because 5 is a restriction to infinity. And that's why it's so important to have the A's and the R's written down. Okay, the last problem for the notes is going to be a story problem on the test. So the only difference between this, the braking distance of a certain car traveling v miles per hour, is this formula. I want to rewrite it so that you can see that the v squared over 20 only. The other ones, if you look at them, already have the inequality written down. Do you see how it's already written down with the inequality? The only thing different is you have to, is less than 75. The distance is less than 75. So you're just going to put less than 75. It might say less than or equal to 75, and then you would have to put a less than and equal to sign. So that's the only difference. Again, you need to bring everything over to one side. So the first thing I would do is bring everything over to one side, because you can't factor unless there's a 0 on the right side. I would multiply everything by 20. I would have 20v plus v squared minus 1500 is less than 0. And then I have to reorder it so that it's in decreasing order. Notice that this one does not have a fraction, so you are not going to have a restriction. All you have to do is factor it then. Factors of 1500 that will give you 20 in the middle. I bet you've never factored 1500. You can go over here though and get rid of the, whoops, that's supposed to be a negative. So all I did was take away the 0 for the 1500 and made it 15, and I took away the 0 for the 20 and made it 2. And a lot of you know the factors of 15 are 5 and 3. That will give you 2 in the middle, and it needs to be a negative 3 and a positive 5. Well, that's the same thing with this. It needs to be a positive 50 and a negative 30 so that it makes 20 in the middle. So one answer is V equals a negative 50, and the other answer is V is equal to 30. So you make your chart. You don't have any restrictions because there's no fractions, but this is a special one, and that's why I started, because this is a story problem dealing with velocity. You can't have a negative 50 velocity. You can only start at 0 and have a 30. So you have a 0 and a 30 zone. The negatives is automatic a no. You can't have a negative velocity. So you really only have a zone 1 and a zone 2 to try on the test. This will be problem number 25 on the review sheet and the test. And if you think about this, would zone 1 be more accurate or zone 2? 30 can go all the way to like 700. It can go to 800. It can go at 1,000. Can you have 1,000 miles per hour? Or can you go from 0 to 30 miles per hour? I mean, this doesn't even make sense. You can't have 1,000 miles per hour. So it's definitely between 0 and 30. So the interval is between 0 and 30. So this is a unique one because of a story problem. And that is all the notes we have for 2.7.